A leader that I once worked with said, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Once you get complacent, it is time to amp it up. You need to learn something new, potentially somewhere else, or just dig into self-development. It doesn't always have something that the company offers you or provides for you. You are your biggest fan. So investing in yourself and something that makes sense is very much worthwhile.
Welcome back to the Lanteria podcast. Today, we have a fantastic guest. We have Meghan Moseley with us, who is going to be talking to us about her history in HR, but also diving deeper into performance management, which is something that we hear a lot about. And we're always interested to hear more from experts like Meghan who can help us out. So Meghan, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
So to get started, I'm always interested to hear how people's background, their history, like how they got into HR, how they got into their current role, because I think it's a role that people tend to have a very interesting background in. So do you want to just give us a few minutes of sort of where you come from, what you've been doing?
Absolutely. How I got into HR was from the first experience I've had. I worked at a fabric warehouse, and I was one of the employees in the warehouse to prepare swatch for the salespeople to deliver. Well, we noticed that the door going from the warehouse to the front office would stay locked. And unless we were approved to come to the front, we could not go up to the front. And I knew how that made me feel, and I saw how it impacted my coworkers. And at that point, I felt if I can ever be in a position to ensure someone does not feel like we are feeling right now, then that's what I'm going to do. And that's where my path led me into HR.
Interesting. And your current roles, what got you into the position that you're in now? Sort of what has been your path from there to being in a position where you're, running HR for a pretty interesting company that, is making highly technical parts. And what has been the difference, across the different companies you've worked at, and like how have you had to adapt your own HR management style or your own HR processes?
Really great question. So with me growing up professionally on the floor, all my experience has been in manufacturing. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons I love manufacturing is because the people are real people. I'm not saying no, they're not, but you get involved with their families. Manufacturing is usually in small towns. You get involved with the community, and it just becomes something where you're welcomed into and you're a part of. And so I struck it out with manufacturing for that reason, and I have just grown in responsibility. And a gentleman I used to work with a few years ago, he became president and CEO of the company that I'm at now. He contacted me and asked me if I would be interested in leading the HR function for his corporation. And here
Very
I am.
Cool. Very cool. And what do you, I'm sure you're connected with other HR people that sort of are in other different industries. What would you say is, we actually have a lot of clients that are in manufacturing. So it's always interesting to me to see what is the difference in running HR for a manufacturing company. Like, what is some of the critical things that you need to look out for that you might not in, obviously, like a tech startup or in, consultancy or a law firm? What do you guys have to deal with that is sort of different from other HR functions?
Well, you have to balance the needs of your customers with what is the right thing to do by your employee. And so customers can become demanding. You don't want to risk losing business, but you also don't let your employees safe conditions or without much of a rest period in between. You have to be realistic in balancing both of those. And sometimes that's hard. At the forefront of manufacturing, though, probably the same in construction, I would say that safety is equally important as HR quality, because safety can make or break you. If you're making widgets on a line and you have a person to cut themselves, that has to shut down. You have to do incident investigate. You have to ensure that you do the best you possibly by our employees. I love my employees. I take ownership with them, and I try to be eyes and ears and a voice for them.
There's probably I assume there's a lot of like compliance and OSHA type of stuff that you guys have to deal with compared to other types of companies.
Absolutely. And, noise, hearing tests that you need to conduct, for the area that you're in. There are arc flash tests. There are lockout, tagout. It's just a lot of different things, and ensuring the employees aren't only aware of that, but know that they have the responsibility and the ability to stop a line if there's a safety issue without retaliation is important. So you become one of them in the sense that they know that you are their brother's keeper. You know?
Yeah. No, it's a totally different world. I mean, I work in technology, so I talk to a lot of the people in manufacturing, and it's always funny because the compliance that we have is very different from the compliance that you guys have. Our job is much more lightweight than what you guys deal with in industry. So we wanted to dive into performance management, something that you're passionate about. It's something you work on a lot about, and I think it's interesting because I think from some of the companies that I've met, or potential clients that we've talked to that are in manufacturing, performance management is either like this really important aspect of it, or sometimes they don't care. They're like, I just want to make sure people clock in and they clock out. Like, that's it. So I thought it was interesting that with your background, like that's something you're passionate about. So when did you sort of get passionate about performance management? What was your like aha moment that this is something that works very well? Just walk us through that.
So again, my experience is what led to that. I've worked for some companies where performance management was all about speaking about it, but there was very little follow through. And so I thought, you don't care about my development, why should I? And that's when I was younger in my career, earlier in my career. Then I had a few managers that took the time to talk through my performance. It was a very transparent conversation. We talked about my abilities to grow and whether the things I could do to prepare myself as a human being, but then also as their employee. So I appreciated that because they showed they cared about me. They saw something in me, and it wasn't for their benefit necessarily. So again, I know how both of those situations made me feel. And if I could impact someone feeling like I'm just another number, as opposed to someone who has capability and talent, then that's what I wanted to do. I mean, we all have our moments of imposter syndrome, if you will, where we feel like we shouldn't even be in this role. What are we doing? I don't feel like I know enough to be effective. But somehow we push through it and we learn more and more. And then we become subject matter experts. And then you get comfortable. Well, a leader that I once worked with said, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I love that saying because once you get complacent, it is time to amp it up. You need to learn something new, potentially somewhere else, or just dig into self-development. It doesn't always have to be something that the company offers you or provides for you. You are your biggest fan. So investing in yourself into something that makes sense is very much worthwhile. And performance management is about conversations and storytelling and showing people that they do have worthwhile qualities and capabilities. And far too often, we focus on what they aren't doing or what they can't do instead of, this is what you're doing. Here's how I think you could do it better.
How do you usually push? I mean, because sometimes you can have people that consider even that positive message of saying like, hey, I think you're doing a really good job. Here's where I think you can do better. Some people just naturally have a tendency to look at negativity, to see a message as negative. How would you recommend from an HR perspective or even a manager, because a lot of times the managers are doing performance reviews, to push through that and try and not avoid that conflict, but figure out a way to make it so the employee is sort of understanding like, hey, this is a positive thing. This is an area of growth, rather than like me telling you like, hey, you're doing this wrong. Because I get the feeling a lot of people do, like naturally, that's like their first instinct.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. That should not be the first conversation you have with your employee about performance. So there needs to be a baseline perspective established with them. So when it comes time at the beginning of the year or whenever goal setting is, set the goals together. Make sure that the employee understands what success looks like in the goals. And one of the things that I have learned going business to business is we all don't define words the same way. Simple words such as manager, performance evaluation. Have that conversation with your employees to ensure there will not be results. So when you set those goals together and both sides understand the expectation, meet with your employees in a one-on-one. Most of the time I hear managers say, I don't have time.
Yeah.
You need to take time because you are investing in their future. Quite usually, part of your goals are being passed on to your employees. So it's in your best interest to understand how they're doing, if they're going to make them, or if they're struggling and need additional help, because the employee might not come to you and say, hey, I'm struggling. I know this is in my goals. Going back to most employers or even just certain managers have no interest in performance reviews.
Yeah.
So what I try to work with my managers on is make the goals together, use those as the template for your one-on-one conversations, whether it's every week, bi-weekly, or monthly. As you make notes from those meetings, a few things happen. One, you are not surprised how things are going to shake out at the end of the year because you have your pulse on it and it's you can reroute it. Two, the employee is not going to be surprised when the conversation comes at the end of the year, what the shakeout was.
Yeah.
Feel more comfortable talking to their manager about challenges based upon how the manager responds. And when it comes to performance review time, you have your notes from the entire year.
Yeah.
Formulate that back into the review. Because one of the main reasons employers don't like because they have to sit there and take the time. And it takes a lot of time if you have notes. And there's also a level of bias that is there because you tend to remember the prior 3 months. You don't necessarily remember the prior 12.
Yeah.
So if an employee did something right, you're going to give them a rave review. If an employee upset you, you're going to remember that more than anything else that they've done. And I also tell employees, keep a sheet, a spreadsheet. I have one and it's called What Have I Done Lately? And each time I do something either really well or something that wasn't necessarily in my job description, but I made a positive impact, I keep up with that. And that helps me remember what to put in my evaluation. So it's a really great process if you do it the right way.
You're right. That's an interesting way to do it too, even just a self-evaluation to remember things in the meeting that you can bring up. And how is it different? I mean, one of the most difficult parts for me in like performance reviews is, so for in our case, like technical people, so developers, their skills are basically like, it's very like time in, time out. Like you're going to develop this, you basically estimate how much time it's going to take, and then you have your output. How does that work in, and I struggle with this, how does it work in manufacturing with people whose job really is, it's more remedial, or it's more like the same task every day, very repetitive type of work? How do people handle those types of performance reviews in those cases where it's like, hey, my work is very repetitive day to day. It really doesn't change that much. And it's more about like attitude and just how the team kind of works together. Like, what is the typical performance review for that type of, more junior role?
That's a really great question. One of the main things would be the safety metrics.
Okay.
So how safe have you been? How many hazards have you reported? How many first aids have come into play for the business? Are you involved in a safety committee? So stuff like that. You also have quality measurement.
Yeah.
Especially in food, but if there are problems where field service has to go out into the field to fix something that was in your area, if it's a widget and people are returning the widgets because there are issues with the delivery or the performance of that, it can be behavior, because many companies have shifted from not only what we do, but how we do it. And I know our code of conduct and our code of ethics is probably based on behavior and how we conduct ourselves. So it's not just about the widget that we made. It is more about how we made that widget, that we made it safe, we made it with quality products. If we were able to work with our peers, resolve conflict, if, we required overtime, how you responded to that, what your attendance has been like, how much discipline that you had. It's really looking at, are you a good corporate citizen?
Okay. What do the tools look like that you guys use? I mean, are you guys from a HR perspective, you're having a vision of everyone in the organization. Do managers from other areas of the business also see sort of what's going on, or, what tools are you guys using and how do you guys manage that?
So for our HRIS system, we have 𝗓𝗨𝗧.
Okay.
And there is a performance module within 𝗓𝗨𝗧 that is completely fantastic. It has an area it gives you templates, but it has an area called journaling. And in that journal, you can put your notes in there from one-on-one meetings with your employees. So employees can report it just like managers can.
Okay.
As journal entries that you can put notes to yourself in there, and you can mark them private so that your manager doesn't see them. You are truly the only person that sees it.
Okay.
There is a career planning template in the journal to where you can think about what you want to do in the next few years and what you need to do to get there. And we're also getting managers more involved in those career conversations, because even lean organizations, you might not have a lot of growth upward, but you're limited on what that horizontal growth looks like. So we're implementing a lot of cross training and truly finding out what it is people want to do. We also have started recently what we call the inTEST Leadership Academy. It's the most one that this company has ever had. And we have 8 employees in our first cohort that is learning more about servant leadership. So the first group will learn about themselves. And then the second session is them learning about how to incorporate the business side into things. And so we're really trying to get people to go back to simplicity. Follow the golden rule, do what you know to do the right thing. I think by going back to the basics, taking that pressure of people to go right to yourself a certain way. We want people to be ourselves.
Yeah.
Thoughtful and to be impactful, and for it to take a path of where someone either wants to go or should go.
And are you doing that internally or hiring, is it like a course or hiring a coach to come in? Internally.
And we are utilizing.
Very cool. That's interesting.
We made it or no, but creates such a strong sense of belonging that many companies are missing the mark on this topic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially, I assume in manufacturing, this is something that kind of gets overlooked in the area of manufacturing, where if you do bring this in, you can probably excel, and especially with retaining employees and recruiting. What is from an HR perspective, what's your main KPI that you're laid out every year and that you focus on the most?
Turnover.
Okay.
We don't have a problem with diversity. We have very strong diverse numbers. We're very thankful for that. It could also be due to our locations. But I would say turnover. Some turnover is very healthy and some turnover is necessary.
Yeah.
But understanding why people leave, that's why I try to focus on stay interviews, because as I talk with managers, I encourage them that you'd rather conduct a stay interview than an exit interview.
Yeah.
Very familiar. Stay interviews are very familiar to people, unfortunately.
Yeah. No. I've heard of it a couple of times, but it's definitely not something that comes up in most conversations we have.
Well, I mean, it's part of your one-on-one with your employees. You can simply ask, what gets you out of bed and brings you to work every day? What are you?
Yeah.
It's just very simple conversations. We make everything so hard.
Yeah.
You need to ask an employee to teach questions, and they're worried whether or not they're going to get the right answer, and then some retaliatory events like that for the answer.
Yeah.
We're not about all that. We're all about, we want to understand what the best version of you looks like and how we can help get there.
No, that's super cool. I think, coming from manufacturing, from other people I've talked to in manufacturing, I think you guys have an interesting, forward-looking way of doing things that other companies I've seen, unfortunately, probably don't attack this in that way. So, congratulations to you. And thank you so much for joining us, Meghan. I really appreciate this. And I appreciate spending the time and kind of walking through how performance reviews go in a sector that, frankly, I haven't discussed it that deeply with people. So it was interesting to hear your point of view.
Thank you for
Thank you.